There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a house when the person who made it a home is gone. It is not restful. It is not the peaceful silence of a Sunday morning when the coffee is hot and the newspaper is folded on the table. It is an absence, a hollow where something used to be. For 51 years, my mornings had a shape to them. They were built around the sound of my wife Margaret moving through our kitchen in Knoxville, Tennessee, the soft thud of the cabinet door she always opened too hard, the hiss of the kettle, the particular way she hummed without knowing she was doing it. Old hymns, mostly, songs her grandmother had taught her. I used to tease her about it. "Maggie, you're doing it again." And she'd look up with that smile, that quick, surprised smile, like she'd been caught at something wonderful, and she'd say, "Well, somebody in this house ought to be singing." Then one Tuesday morning in November she wasn't there. A heart attack. Fast, the doctors told me, as if that were a comfort. She didn't suffer. She just left. And I was standing in the middle of a kitchen that still smelled like her, and I had absolutely no idea what to do with the rest of my life. My name is Walter. I was 67 years old, a retired civil engineer, a man who had spent 4 decades solving structural problems, bridges, drainage systems, load-bearing calculations, and I could not figure out how to make myself a cup of coffee without my hands shaking. The days blurred. I'd sit in the armchair by the front window, the one Margaret had picked out at an estate sale in 2003 and reupholstered herself in a blue-green fabric she called the color of the Gulf. I'd sit there and watch the light change on the street and not move for hours. My daughter would call. My son would call. Neighbors would drop off food, casseroles, pies, all the things people bring when they do not know what else to give. I ate very little of any of it. I said, I ate very little. My son, Daniel, is a good man. He's 38, works in insurance, lives about 40 miles outside of Nashville with his wife Christine and their 2 kids, my grandson Tyler, who is 9, and my granddaughter Becca, who is 6 and who has Margaret's eyes exactly. It kills me in the best possible way every time I look at her. Daniel drove down to Knoxville every weekend for 2 months after the funeral. He'd sit with me and we'd watch football and not say much, which was its own kind of kindness. Eventually he said what I had been dreading. "Dad, you can't stay here by yourself. It's not right. We have the room. The kids want you there. Please." I said no the first time. And the second, I was not raised to be a burden. I was the kind of man who fixed things himself, who never asked for help until there was absolutely no other option. But by January, the house had become something I didn't recognize anymore. Every room was a relic. The kitchen was a room where my wife used to sing. The bedroom was a room where she used to sleep. I was haunting the place like a ghost who hadn't figured out yet that he was supposed to move on. So in February, I loaded 2 suitcases into the back of Daniel's truck, locked the front door of the only home I'd known in 30 years, and I drove away from it without looking back, because I knew if I looked back I wouldn't leave. Daniel and Christine had set up the downstairs guest room for me. Christine was gracious about it, outwardly at least. She was a precise, organized woman with a talent for making everything look effortless. She worked in pharmaceutical sales and she was very good at it. She had that quality of making you feel attended to without quite feeling known. She gave me a warm welcome and a careful smile, and she meant some of it, I think. Her mother, Gloria, was also living in the house. She had moved in the previous spring when Christine's father had passed. Gloria was a quiet woman, somewhere in her late 60s. She had soft gray hair and small dark eyes that caught things, the kind of eyes that were always doing a quick inventory of a room when they walked into it. She had worked as a pharmacy technician for 30 years before she retired. She told me that the first night at dinner, sitting across from me with her hands folded in her lap. 30 years, she said. I know more about medications than most people ever care to learn. She said it pleasantly, like it was just conversation. I nodded and thought nothing of it at all. On my 3rd evening in the house, Gloria appeared at my bedroom door just before dinner. She was carrying a steaming mug. "Walter," she said, her voice warm and easy, "I made you a cup of that herbal tea. Daniel mentioned you have trouble sleeping since Margaret passed." End quote. I found this blend. It's chamomile and valerian root. It'll help. I want you resting well." I looked at her, and I felt genuinely touched. It was such a specific, thoughtful gesture. I told Daniel your favorite breakfast was eggs over easy with rye toast, and she was the one who had them waiting for me the next morning. I thanked her, and I meant it. She waved it off with a modest little shake of her head. Your family now, Walter. I just want you comfortable. That became the pattern. Every evening, Gloria would bring me a mug of tea. She was very particular about it. She prepared it separately from whatever Christine was making, always in the same dark blue mug, always delivered to me personally. She would hover for a moment while I took the first sip, her eyes moving over my face in a way that I thought, at the time, was simply the attentiveness of a generous woman. I appreciated it, and the tea did seem to help me sleep, at first. I was getting 6, sometimes 7 hours, which was more than I'd managed since the funeral. I told Daniel this. He looked relieved. Daniel. He thanked his mother-in-law over dinner, and she smiled and said it was the least she could do. But somewhere around the 3rd week, the sleep stopped feeling restful. I would wake up in the morning with a heaviness in my limbs that I couldn't shake, not the ache of poor sleep, but something deeper, something that settled into my joints, like concrete. I noticed a tremor in my hands that I hadn't had before, just slight, just enough to make me set my coffee cup down carefully. I started getting headaches that arrived without warning, a dense, pressured pain behind my eyes that would last for hours. I told myself it was grief. I told myself it was the adjustment, the new house, the new rhythms. I told myself I was 67 years old and that the body makes its feelings known at this age in ways you cannot simply ignore. What I could not explain away so easily was the other thing, the thing I noticed sometime in the 4th week. I was in the kitchen refilling my water glass. Gloria was at the counter with her back to me. She hadn't heard me come in, and I watched her do something with the tea. It was fast, a small motion. She was holding a little amber bottle, the kind you'd see in a vitamin shop, and she tipped a few drops of something into the dark blue mug before filling it with hot water. She turned and saw me, and her face rearranged itself so quickly, so smoothly, that if I hadn't been watching I would have missed the flash of something under the pleasantness. Goodness, she said with a light laugh. You startled me. I'm putting in a few drops of this liquid magnesium supplement. It's wonderful for sleep. I should have mentioned it. I hope you don't mind. She held the bottle out to me, label facing forward. I took it, read it, handed it back. No, of course not, I said. Magnesium. Sure, that sounds fine. And I drank the tea that night because I genuinely did not know yet how to believe what a small cold part of my brain was starting to suggest. The tremor in my hands got worse. I started dropping things. A fork at dinner. My reading glasses. Once, a full glass of water that slipped out of my grip for no reason I could account for. I noticed Tyler watching me from across the room when it happened, his 9-year-old face serious and puzzled. And I noticed Christine watching too, but differently. Not with concern. With something that was more like inventory. A quick, clinical assessment, and then her eyes moving away. I realized, being evaluated for something. I just didn't know what yet. What I did know was this: Gloria only ever prepared my tea. End quote. Christine cooked the family meals, and they were regular, unremarkable dinners, and no one else in the house was trembling or dropping things or sleeping 13 hours and waking up exhausted. It was only me. And the tea was only mine. I started asking myself a question I didn't want to ask. I started asking it quietly, in the back of my mind, the way you might check a crack in a foundation, pressing gently to see if it runs deeper than the surface. Why wouldn't Gloria let anyone else prepare my tea? Daniel had offered once. He'd been standing in the kitchen, seen the mug, said, "Mom, I can do that," and Gloria had taken it out of his hands with a smooth, certain motion. No, I've got a system. The proportions matter. You go sit with your dad. He looked mildly confused and let it go. I had been grateful. Now, I was something else, entirely. The night everything changed, we were all at the kitchen table. It was a Thursday. Becca had had a good day at school, and she was in a buoyant, chattery mood, talking about a class project on weather patterns with the focused intensity that 6-year-olds bring to things they have decided are important. The blue mug was in front of me as always. Things docking. I had wrapped my hands around it. I hadn't drunk from it yet. Gloria was watching me from across the table in that particular way of hers. That patient, waiting attention. And Becca, who had the curiosity of a small scientist and the impulse control of a small golden retriever, reached across the table and picked up my mug. "Grandpa, can I try it?" she said. "I like tea." Gloria's chair scraped back so fast it hit the cabinet behind her. The sound was like a gunshot in the small kitchen. Christine's arm shot out and her hand wrapped around Becca's wrist, not roughly, but with a force that was absolutely not the casual correction of a parent managing a child's table manners. "Give that back, Becca. Right now." Her voice was taut as a wire. Becca, startled, released the mug. Christine pulled it across the table and set it out of reach, her hand staying on it. The whole room went still. Daniel was looking at his wife. He had that expression I knew from him as a boy, the face he made when something didn't add up, and he was running the numbers again to make sure he hadn't made a mistake. Gloria had sat back down. Her face was composed, but there was a pallor under it, a grayness she was working to conceal. She picked up her fork and looked at her plate. And for just a moment, just one unguarded moment, Christine looked at her mother with an expression of raw, wordless alarm. It was the look of two people who had just watched something come very close to going catastrophically wrong. Daniel looked at me. I looked at him. I said nothing. That night I lay in the dark in the downstairs guest room and I let myself think the thought I had been refusing to finish. I was a man who had built his career on structural integrity, on asking, plainly and without sentiment, where the weakness is, where the load is being carried, where the thing will fail, and the structure of the past 5 weeks, laid out honestly in my mind, had a very clear answer to where the weakness was. It was the blue mug. It was the amber bottle. It was 30 years as a pharmacy technician. It was Christine's hand shooting out to stop a 6-year-old from taking a single sip. "Margaret," I thought in the dark, "I think I understand now why you always said I was too trusting." I did not confront anyone. I am not, by nature, a dramatic man. Instead, the next morning, I quietly poured the tea down the bathroom drain. I began disposing of every evening's mug in the same way, drinking enough to be believable, emptying the rest when I was alone. I also, very quietly, called my doctor back in Knoxville. I described my symptoms. She was concerned enough to order blood work and refer me to someone closer to Nashville who could run a full panel. I drove myself to that appointment on a Wednesday morning and told no one in the house where I was going. The results came back 10 days later. The doctor called me on my cell phone while I was sitting in my truck in a parking lot outside a hardware store because I had needed somewhere to go that wasn't that house. She told me, in the careful and serious voice that doctors use when they are delivering something they wish they did not have to deliver, that my blood work showed elevated levels of thallium, a heavy metal, the broad GA, toxic in small, consistent doses, consistent with long-term low-level exposure. "It accumulates," she explained. "It's not detectable by taste. It mimics neurological decline. It looks, in an older patient, like natural deterioration." I sat in that parking lot for a long time after the call ended. I thought about Christine's pharmaceutical sales career, about the contacts that built the lab suppliers, the chemical distributors, the networks of industry knowledge that a decade in that field would give a person. I thought about Gloria's 30 years reading labels, managing controlled substances, knowing exactly what was trackable and what was not. I thought about the house in Knoxville, Margaret's life insurance, my retirement savings, in product, the property, fully paid off, worth 4 times what we had paid for it in 1991. I thought about what a 67-year-old man's quiet death from apparent neurological decline, perhaps a stroke, perhaps simply the body giving way, would look like from the outside. I thought about how no one would have questioned it, how everyone would have said, "He never recovered after Margaret. It just took him. You could see it coming." I thought about my granddaughter Becca and her hand around that mug. Then I called Daniel. He didn't say much while I talked. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. I heard him exhale. Then I heard a sound. I recognized the sound of a grown man trying not to break in half. He said, "Dad, give me the name of your doctor." And then he said, "Don't drink anything in this house. Don't eat anything that was prepared separately for you. I'll handle this." And his voice was measured and careful and utterly devastated, and I have never in my life been more proud of the man he became. He handled it the way I would have. He went to the authorities with my medical records and the documentation from my doctor. He did not accuse. He presented structural evidence and let it speak. Within 3 days, there was an investigation. The amber bottle, which Gloria had not yet discarded, perhaps because she hadn't imagined it would ever be found, was located in the back of a bathroom cabinet. Its contents were not magnesium. A forensic analysis of the blue mug, which Daniel had quietly preserved without anyone knowing, confirmed thallium residue. The morning the investigators came to the house, I was sitting in the living room in the early light. Tyler was at school. Becca was at school. The house was quiet in a way that had nothing to do with grief. Gloria came downstairs in her robe and stopped when she saw 2 men in the hallway with Daniel. Christine came down a few minutes later and stood very still at the bottom of the stairs. One of the investigators spoke their names and explained why they were there in the flat, procedural language of a person doing a job. I watched Christine's face. She did not go pale the way Sarah had in that other story, some other man's nightmare. She went rigid. She became very, very still, like a person trying to make themselves smaller than they are. Gloria looked at me then. It was the first time in 5 weeks that her eyes had met mine without calculation behind them. She just looked at me, and, in her face, I saw something that surprised me. Not remorse exactly. Something older than remorse. Something that looked, briefly, like recognition, like she was seeing me, for the first time, as a person. I didn't say anything. There was nothing I needed to say. Christine was not quiet. As they walked her through the formalities, she turned to Daniel and her voice cracked open with a fury that sounded almost like grief. "You did this," she said. "You chose him over your own family." Daniel looked at his wife of 11 years, the woman he had built a life with, the mother of his children, and his face was the saddest thing I have ever seen. "No," he said, quietly. "You did this. We just told the truth about it." They were taken in for questioning that morning. The charges that followed were serious. The investigation was thorough. What came out in the proceedings was methodical and cold. The financial motive was straightforward: my estate, the Knoxville property, the retirement accounts, all of which would pass to Daniel, who Christine and Gloria had apparently calculated would be manageable. What they had not calculated was Daniel. They had not accounted for the kind of man he actually was. Tyler and Becca did not understand most of what was happening. Tyler was old enough to know that something serious had occurred and young enough to absorb it with the remarkable resilience that children carry like a secret resource. Becca asked where her mommy was, and Daniel held her and told her, in the careful, honest language you use with a 6-year-old, that mommy had done something wrong and was going to be away for a while. She cried. She cried a great deal. And I sat with her on the floor of the living room and let her climb into my lap, and I held on to her for both our sakes. The months that followed were hard in a way that was different from grief, but lived in the same neighborhood. Daniel functioned. He got the kids to school and made their dinners and showed up to his job and called me every night, but he was hollowed out. He had loved Christine. Whatever she had become or had always been underneath, he had genuinely loved her, and that love didn't evaporate because she had betrayed him. It curdled. Which is, in some ways, worse. He blamed himself for bringing me into that house. He blamed himself for not seeing it. He replayed every moment, looking for the thing he should have caught. And I told him, many times, in many different ways, that the failure of another person's character is not a structural flaw in yours. He heard me. See, it took time for him to believe me. I moved back to Knoxville in the spring. Not because I was driven out, but because I was ready. The house no longer felt like a museum. The Brinking video, I had been away long enough that it felt, when I walked back through the front door, like a place I could live in again rather than a place I was haunting. I opened Margaret's kitchen cabinet and I stood there for a moment with my hand on the door, and I talked to her the way I do sometimes, quietly, just to keep the connection. I told her what had happened, end quote, end quote. I told her I was okay. I told her she would not have believed any of it, and she would have. That woman had always seen people more clearly than I did, and I thanked her for raising Daniel right even when I thought she was being too soft on him. She wasn't being too soft. She was building something in him that saved my life. Gradually, things found their shape. Daniel brought the kids to Knoxville on weekends when he could. Tyler took an interest in my old engineering books, which made me laugh for about 10 minutes straight. Becca decided she was going to learn to make Margaret's biscuit recipe, and we spent an entire Saturday doing exactly that. Flour everywhere. Her small, serious face focused on the measurements with the same intensity she'd applied to weather patterns back in February. They were not perfect biscuits. They were the best biscuits I have ever eaten. Daniel is doing better. He is taking it one day at a time, which is all any of us can do. He has started, cautiously, carefully, letting people back in. Not rushing, just leaving the door a little bit open. I think he will find his way. He is his mother's son. Yes, as for me, if you are out there listening, maybe a father yourself, maybe a grandfather, maybe someone who has lost a person who made their life make sense. I want to tell you something I have earned the right to say. You are not a burden for needing your family. You are not weak for trusting the people around your table. The cruelty that some people are capable of, the cold calculation beneath the warm gesture that is on them. That is their failure, their poverty, their loss. You do not have to carry it. But trust your body. Trust the thing that wakes you up at 3 in the morning and won't let you go back to sleep. Trust the question you keep deciding not to ask. 3. The discomfort you keep explaining away. I was an engineer for 40 years. I know what it looks like when something is wrong with a structure. I know what it looks like when the load is being carried in the wrong place. I know what a crack looks like when it runs deeper than the surface. It's trust that knowledge. Whatever form it takes in your life, it doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you someone who survives. It's thank you. It's CUMB. I got to sit on my own front porch this past September and watch the light come through the oak trees Margaret planted in 1998. I got to hear Tyler yelling something from inside the house about the Tennessee game. I got to feel Becca's hand in mine, small and sticky with the popsicle she was eating, her Margaret eyes watching the yard. I got to be here for it. All of it. And that is not nothing. That is, in the end, everything. Take care of yourselves. And take care of the people in your lives who have nobody else. They are counting on you more than they will ever say.